protest movements more successful than others. Cool, recording. Yeah, so a bit of context into who we are. So we're fairly new. So basically, we're kind of inspired by the principle of effective altruism in that we want to help as many animals as possible. And we think one of those ways could actually be through kind of grassroots social movements and broad-based kind of public pressure. And we think despite kind of this being playing quite a large role in other important issues, such as civil rights or marriage equality, it's got comparatively little attention in the animal rights or animal advocacy movement. So that's kind of like context, like why we're doing this. And in terms of like how we did the research, so it was quite like a mixed method approach. And that's mainly because it's actually really hard to get like one great method to kind of say, oh yes, these are the most important factors. This is exactly the impact it has. So we're looking at like things that are quite kind of hard to measure, intangible, take like maybe decades, like there's no good control group. So basically it's quite complicated. And kind of for those reasons, we did like a mixed method approach. So we did literature reviews of academic papers. We commissioned our own public opinion polling. We interviewed policymakers, and we also interviewed like academics, movement experts, as well as doing our own case studies into two organizations, one climate, one animal-based organizations. And kind of getting into some of the stuff. So I guess before we kind of go into kind of like what makes some more effective than others, just a quick touch on what outcomes can these kind of protest movements actually achieve. So context there is we actually published a report on this quite recently. It's on our website, so check that out. But like in very brief is one impact is on policy. So there's some papers that show that kind of politicians, especially like elected officials being exposed to protests, they can actually change their kind of both positions and like willingness to vote on certain issues kind of post being exposed to that kind of protest. There's some significant impacts on public opinion. So an example is Extinction Rebellion, which is a climate group in the UK, kind of, well, we think played a large role in influencing public opinion around climate change around 2019 time. And then finally, corporate behavior. So this is like nothing new to animal folks in that with enough pressure, companies do change their kind of policies, and that's very obvious in like corporate welfare work. But also there's pretty good examples of that within kind of divestment movement, both for climate and tobacco. And then, so it's a lot having in the slide, but other things that might impact is movement building. So actually getting people engaged in the movement. One might be like shifting public discourse, which is changing the frequency and framing of issues in the media. But yeah, so I don't want to like, it's not, I'm not doing an outcomes talk on this one, but if you're interested in outcome stuff, check out our report and I'll kind of park this stuff for now. But so what we actually kind of talk about here is kind of, yeah, how do we actually use protests for those who want to do it? Or like, should we even use it in our campaigns, in our movement? Like, is it useful or is it just like a dead end or like something to be kind of worried about? And I guess some context for that is it's just one tool among others. So hopefully no campaign and organization only does the exact same tactic over and over again. Just like you wouldn't only hopefully do leafleting like forever for like 10 years. Hopefully you wouldn't do the same kind of protest either. Ideally, you'd have this diverse range of tactics and they all kind of work in harmony. And in addition to that, protest kind of comes in many different formats. So I think when you hear that word like protest, you just think of a march, a big group of people kind of walking around or like occupying some building. That's kind of like at least the idea I get. But actually, so this is really great bit of research on this book that kind of compiles and finds 346 ways to actually get involved in civil resistance or protest. And it's in the top right of the screen if you want to read that. But some creative examples that I like. So this is actually a protest with no people, which is, well, people holding a banner only, which is, I think, quite different to what we expect. And this is during COVID when obviously people couldn't come out and take action themselves. So Extinction Rebellion in the UK kind of use school children's shoes to represent people at risk, with young people at risk from climate change and air pollution. So that's quite a creative tactic. In addition, this is one from Animal Rebellion, occupying a McDonald's site. So again, use that creativity, whether it's a painted sign or a paper mache burger and all this kind of stuff. So there's lots of different ways to actually kind of do this stuff. Yeah. And then in terms of kind of what makes like a movement effective, and I think one key question is actually how important is stuff that's within the control of, for example, the animal advocacy movement, like how important is what we do versus how important is external conditions. And so internal stuff we can control might be who do we choose to target, what kind of ads do we run, how often do we like organize protests, like who are we trying to mobilize. These are things all we can control. And there's external conditions like who's in government currently, are they favorable to animal issues, What do the public think about animal issues? Do we know anyone, or like what's happening in like the kind of business world, like how good are alternative proteins coming along? Well, things that at least the grassroots can't control very well. And the key question for us is, how important are these two relative to each other? Is it that, like, is our success almost completely determined by the internal of like what we do and what we decide? In that case, that'd be, I think, quite good for us. And in other bad cases, it's almost purely down to external conditions and like, or like who's in power, or like the media and what they influence, in which case it's harder for us to make a change. And then some findings we had in this is it seems very hard to empirically answer this, just because you're kind of, there's almost no way you'll get a good RCT on any of this stuff because you're looking at like societal level changes. So most of this work is informed from like our expert interviews, whether that's our policymakers, academics, or movement experts. And we kind of roughly think that internal factors are as important as external factors. So you might say that external conditions are quite important. So you kind of need to know like what are the good conditions for you to like kind of go and make a big push, but also you need to make sure you have your internal structures well set up to go as well. But to caveat, yeah, we're quite unsure. We want to work on this more, and if anyone has any ideas of how to do this well, I'm all ears. But I think this could be quite an interesting base research question for future research too. And then maybe this is what everyone came for, is a list of things that make some protests good and some bad. Hopefully, yeah, this will be informative and useful. And here we're talking about specifically kind of like protests on a single day. So like it as a tactic, as a one-off, rather than like a long-standing movement, which I'll talk about in a second. And some things we found is numbers seem to be almost by far the most important factor, which might be surprising, might not be surprising, but it was by far quite important, especially influencing policy, just because policymakers are influenced by, I guess, what the public think, and therefore large numbers is like a larger threat to their credibility. And similar to that is diversity. So is it a group of people kind of across, like, is it a range of groups across society that are mobilized to take part in this action? Is it teachers? Is it doctors? Is it kind of actors and waitresses and students and professionals? Is it everyone getting involved? Because if so, that's much more compelling to policymakers, just because they kind of see, oh, it's not just one fringe group, but it's actually a wide range of society who all believe this. So that's quite important. And finally, something that we called a rapid response capacity. So when things happen in the external world, kind of how do you react to that, and how do you kind of capitalize that to your advantage? An example might be, so when George Floyd was murdered in 2020, Black Lives Matter had kind of spent years and years building up a really strong like base and foundation grassroots, so they can kind of mobilize really quickly and really push kind of the ideas of Black Lives Matter into like the public mainstream in a way I think that might not have happened if they had no time to build that kind of capacity up. And examples for animal advocacy might be when a investigation comes out that kind of highlights atrocities on farming, can we kind of mobilize around that quickly and kind of push that further into like society and kind of use that to our advantage. And things that don't go so well, again, I think maybe this one's obvious, is violence. I think it's actually quite contentious within at least academic literature on whether it's good or not. But we think broadly it's harmful for public opinion generally. So there are some caveats. When sometimes it might have been useful, but we think as a whole, it doesn't seem to be that. And by violence, we almost definitely mean like harm to humans, but even property destruction and sabotage can also be kind of construed as violent and also turn off kind of the public. And then another thing that came out is something called, I guess, the usual suspects. So basically, is it the same kind of like left-wing progressive hippies that protest all the time, or is it like an unexpected group in society? An example of this is in Europe, so school strikers, kind of kids between the ages of 12 and 18, usually people who don't kind of go out and protest very often, kind of came out in massive numbers for the climate movement a couple of years ago. And that was quite like, wow, we should take this seriously. This is like a new group in society. So things like that are quite influential. And kind of on this kind of interesting things that we were interested in is what are the impacts of disruptive tactics? So Just Stop Oil is a group based in the UK. So they did quite disruptive things. And for example, they climbed on oil tankers to block oil distribution, and they attached themselves to goalposts during football games. So like pretty like out there, not your normal everyday tactics. And we want to know, like, how does this actually influence public opinion versus like your normal go on a march? And basically what we found was, so context, this picture is from some polling we did. So we ran 3 polls, all of 2,000 people, in the UK as a public opinion polls to kind of measure public opinion kind of before, during, and after the campaign, which kind of lasted roughly like 2 or 3 weeks. And the first finding we had was there was no obvious backfire effect. So even though support for the group actually went down, there was no change in support for the issue. And most people don't really care about support for their group, but they do care about support for, like, climate more broadly. So that's what they care about. And that didn't go down, which is great. And there was some weak evidence that it actually helped increase willingness to take part in climate action. So that's good. But yeah, again, report on our website, check it out. And I'm going to go fast now because I think I'm running out of time. I'm actually going to skip right to the end. The most important takeaways was, I think, basically is focus on building a large and diverse base and using a range of nonviolent tactics. That seems to be one of the most important things. So like definitely do that. In terms of organizations, good governance seems really important. So making sure you don't kind of fall apart due to like conflict or like compensation or decision-making reasons. So basically make sure you set up well if you're like going to be a grassroots organization. And we need more research. And I'm not just saying that because it's my job, but I think we should definitely have more research. And even Peter Singer said this at the CARE conference in Poland, so it must be true. So yeah, definitely more research is needed. And yeah, we're doing a bunch more stuff. Check out our website, and I will call it there. So yeah, if anyone's interested, check out our website or email me. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of the symposium.
Here for that. We have Eva from Pax Fauna, who will discuss the role of collective political action in ending the use of animals for food. So please take it away, Eva. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Let's see. So my name's Eva. Sorry, let me just make sure I'm sharing the screen I mean to share. Cool, so my name is Eva. I am a co-founder with the group Pax Fauna. This is Evolved Together, framing a role for collective political action for ending the use of animals for food. So I'll tell you a little bit about Pax Fauna. We exist in order to revitalize the grassroots movement space. We understand that grassroots social movements are really the best position to seize the public narrative more than to advocate for specific policy goals. And so we conduct research on messaging strategies, organizing in order to support the grassroots animal freedom movement. And we are really interested in, we started out really interested in some of these numbers that I think a lot of us might be familiar with, saying that huge amounts of Americans support really radical goals for animal freedom, supporting a slaughterhouse ban, a ban on all animal farming, saying that animals should have the same rights as humans. And I think we also won't be surprised to hear that in some of those same surveys and in others, we get very overwhelming numbers of Americans saying things like eating meat is a personal choice and no one can tell us what to do. No one can tell me what to do. Along with the fact that we just don't have huge increases in vegetarianism and veganism that would support, or that would be implied by some of these numbers up top. And we think that we know what's going on in that we thought that we knew what was going on in those bottom numbers, and we were really curious about what was going on in those top numbers, like what's going on when people are saying really, really, really supportive things for animal freedom. And our assumption is framing. Framing, we know from concepts like glass half empty, glass half full, these different ways to tell the truth by pointing to just different parts of it. 20% fat, 80% fat-free on our cashew yogurt. But framing's not always that simple. There's, different ways, sometimes pretty complexly different ways to point to real directions of the truth. They can be a little bit more subtle, like sale signs emphasizing the original purchase price or the amount saved below it. So when we come back to these numbers, I'm assuming that the reason that we get such different responses from some of the same people when we ask these seemingly like contradictory questions is a matter of framing. That the first questions asking about animal rights, about banning slaughterhouses, about what's happening to animals, activates real values that people really have, while just not bringing to light things that they also really care about, personal choice and autonomy. And so we did some studies to examine some of this. And I'll mostly be talking about the interviews and the focus groups today. And we will be putting write-ups on our website shortly. I'll give you our website later if you'd like to be on our mailing list, and I'll quickly talk about our methods here. So we talked to about 200 ordinary meat-eating Americans in both one-to-one interviews, where we asked lots of open-ended questions to kind of map out how people are thinking about animals' use for food, like what's going on when they make those really supportive statements, like saying that they want to ban slaughterhouses. And also in focus groups, we tested messages. And we did that in focus groups because there's this tendency of people in focus groups to kind of remind each other of what the dominant narratives are. And it kind of gives us a little bit of resistance to see if our messages are actually, working. We followed this qualitative study with National Survey that presented different animal freedom messages and measured support for policy proposal as well as support for kind of animal freedom more broadly with some broad questions.
Eva, sorry about that. People are requesting if you can make it full screen, please. If not, no worries.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much.
There. I believe that is full screen. Interrupt me if that is not.
It is good. Thank you.
Cool. Great. So if we were to, yeah, in our interviews, the futility was kind of the most difficult objection to animal freedom to overcome. And we heard that linked very directly to the consumer frame. Because when people were thinking of themselves in society as consumers, as people whose impact was made by their spending, any spending that they could imagine felt like a really small drop in the bucket. It was really unlikely to cause any real change in the world. So we believe, we've found, I think, that people are really hostile to animal freedom messages when they're in that consumer frame, when they're speaking from really strong values of freedom and personal choice and autonomy. And so we think that a new story would really need to do some heavy lifting, would have to overcome the consumer frame. And a way to do that, we think, is to create a role for government. And we really think that overcoming a consumer frame is going to be key to enabling people to imagine a future without slaughterhouses. And that's going to be very difficult. And I think that's going to be very difficult because the consumer frame is the main way that we're used to interacting with food, thinking about ourselves at restaurants and grocery stores, making decisions about what we buy, what we eat. And a lot of the ways that the movement currently talks about the issue is inadvertently will trigger the consumer frame. Thinking about choosing a more compassionate option or veganism or sayings like peace begins on your plate. Things that really put us back in that headspace of me at the grocery store, me at a restaurant, me as a consumer, as opposed to as a political citizen. So when we reframe, we think that we need to apply really a lot of discipline to our messaging and our strategies. And we need to somehow create some asks of the public that meets them as voters and citizens rather than as consumers. And so I'll present some of the messages that we use to kind of drive that point home. And the first is what we call evolve together. So we would use a message like this, where we're calling for an evolution away from meat at the societal level. Consumers, food producers, restaurants, and grocery stores work together to replace meat from animals and fishes with animal-free food. And notice that this is not individual. It's not asking individual people to change their individual diets, but we're talking about the kind of transformation that our policy objective wants to meet society-wide. Another couple interesting findings were, I'm calling them empathy and mockery, that some objections to animal freedom felt based on some really deeply held values, which once met with empathy and maybe even validation would soften easily. And then others actually felt easy to disarm just by stating them outright. So that's to say that when we actually just stated an opposition message and said, what do you think about that? It would just sort of crumble. The same things that a participant might bring up themselves, if just stated outright, was very easy.
Eva, to interrupt, your slides aren't consistent with what you're saying. I think that they're stuck. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for letting me know that.
Yeah.
Okay, are you seeing?
It says you started screen sharing, but it's black.
How interesting. What an interesting problem we're having here. Okay, we're gonna restart the whole situation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for letting me know, because I want to have relevant slides. Okay, it's telling me it's paused. Are we seeing anything?
Not seeing anything.
Okay, one more try.
Yeah, thank you.
Just exit this whole thing and then present full screen. We will share. Okay, so we're seeing the green glasses.
You might be sharing the wrong screen.
Oh goodness.
Is what a colleague said, yeah. Oh, the woes of remote symposiums. We can bring people around the world together, but we can't bring PowerPoint slides together.
Okay, now what do
you
we
got
see?
this.
Anything now?
No.
So what I'm going to do, so we don't spend any more time, is I'm just going to speak on it, and the slides aren't really that important.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for letting me know. So talking about empathy, culture and cost felt like important ones to meet with empathy when somebody has an objection based on culture. There's some really important things, that values that they're expressing, and acknowledging the loss that we're actually advocating for felt like a really important way to let people kind of move beyond those. Cost also. Not trying to argue that like plant-based food is currently beans and rice are cheaper, but to really acknowledge that, like, yes, right now meat alternatives have not reached price parity, and policy objectives that we're advocating for really want to change that. And when we talk about mockery, what I'm calling mockery, though it was really just kind of a plain statement, was farmer legacy, nature, kind of just saying it outright. Some people think that, since eating meat is natural and we've been doing it for hundreds, thousands of years, we should continue doing it. What do you think about that? Just these kind of naked presentations of an opposition message sometimes could just be met with hostility for that message. And that's all it sort of took to make that idea crumble. So that's where I'll leave it for today. If you want to connect with Pax Fauna, paxfauna.org, I'll put it in the chat. We will be sending out these reports and also smaller studies that will be coming out in the future. And I will also stick around for the Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I have a quick question for you. What's the next kind of research that your organization will be focusing on?
Two things at a time. Right now, we are doing another study to look at a comparison between different messages. So we did a national survey that tested a bunch of different messages, and we'll be getting a little bit deeper into that, comparing both a kind of consumer frame with a systemic frame and an emotional wording with a dry wording of each message, to sort of come up with some data about which one landed the best for, again, both those policy goals and those different just general sentiment goals. And then also studying organizers themselves. How do they get involved? Why did they leave? Why did they stay? Retention and these questions, in case we can come up with recommendations for organizing.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have. But again, we will have a breakout room right at the end of the session with all speakers. So you can go into that breakout room to discuss any questions you may have with any of the speakers so far. So I'm really excited to present next. We have Sasha and Lauri from Farm Sanctuary, who will present their research on whether chickens enjoy learning. So please take it away, Sasha and Lauri.
No, is that the wrong one?
Looks good.
Okay, we can see our slides, so we'll go ahead and get started. All right, hi everyone. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to speak with you today about chickens and the research we're doing with the residents at Farm Sanctuary. So my name is Sasha Prasad-Shreckengast. I'm the research manager here at Farm Sanctuary, and I'll be presenting with my colleague, Lauri Torgerson-White, who is the director of research here. Quickly, I'd like to thank our co-author, who I believe is on this call, Jenna Holikowski, who has been essential in both refining our methods and data collection. And quickly, I'd also like to thank Faunalytics for inviting us to speak today, the ASPCA for funding the study, and everyone at Farm Sanctuary who has made this work possible. We at Farm Sanctuary are excited to be presenting the results of one of our first sanctuary-based studies. So this program involves doing research with animal residents for the animal residents, with the ultimate goal of seeking to uncover the upper boundaries of the cognitive and emotional capacities of farmed species. So what makes this work unique, and how do we hope to contribute in a way that is different from the work of other ethologists? At Farm Sanctuary, we're operating under what we hope is a paradigm-shifting ethical framework for research with animals that we developed in collaboration with ethicist Lauri. So we don't have time today to discuss this framework in detail, but I do want to highlight that all participation is voluntary on the part of our residents, and the research must benefit them in some way.
Okay, the research we do at Farm Sanctuary ultimately impacts animal welfare, both for the individuals involved and potentially for the billions of animals raised and slaughtered for food each year. We all know that animal welfare, which we describe as the way an animal experiences their world, is an attribute of an individual. Animal welfare exists on a continuum from very poor to very good. As a movement, we have focused our efforts on the very poor end of this spectrum, working to end the most egregious practices, like ending the exploitation of fast-growing chicken breeds who are prone to severe health and welfare problems. However, this leaves many animals in this neutral welfare territory in the middle. And because most welfare research on chickens has been focused on improving welfare with production as the ultimate goal, we don't necessarily know what chickens want or need. In recent years, animal welfare scientists have recognized this very problem, that the alleviation of suffering does not in and of itself give animals a good life or a life worth living. They thus borrowed from the positive psychology literature and coined the term positive welfare, which is when the accumulation of life experiences weighs in favor of the positive. Our research seeks to uncover more about what chickens formerly raised for meat, known in the industry as broilers, need to experience positive welfare. We know that chickens can experience both positive and negative emotions and can learn operant tasks, such as pecking piano keys or flipping a lid off a bowl in order to obtain a reward. Research in other species has demonstrated that learning can improve welfare. Animals often show preferences for learning, and learning can lead to positive emotions.
Okay, so I would like to introduce you to the 8 chickens who participated voluntarily in the study. So we have Yoshi, Tia, Muriel, Adora, Dratch, Tiny, Shirley, and Priyanka. And we worked with these hens to test the hypothesis that chickens who have access to learning opportunities will demonstrate greater optimism than those without access to learning opportunities. Get the video to play. All right. So to investigate this, we developed a study in 4 phases. This is phase 1, discrimination training. And as you can see, Helena voluntarily participates in the trial by freely walking into the testing arena. During this training phase, we provided chickens with opportunities to learn which of the 2 bowls always contained a food reward. Each chicken was assigned the rewarding bowl for the duration of the study. So in this case, Helena always received the reward in her white bowl on the left, while the black bowl on the right was always empty. So once the chickens learned which bowls contained the reward, we moved on to our first judgment bias test to measure their baseline emotions. We presented each participant with an unfamiliar gray bowl placed in the middle. This is called our ambiguous bowl. So if the participants, in this case Tia, approached the ambiguous bowl quickly, therefore more closely associating it with a rewarding bowl, she is considered optimistic. If she approaches slowly or avoids it altogether, she's considered pessimistic. Okay, hold on one second. I don't know. Okay.
Go back.
We're gonna
to slide 14.
enter. We're also having technical difficulties. Sorry about this, everyone.
That's okay.
Okay,
Click on 14.
14.
And do it up in the slideshow. Presenter.
Yeah, here, let me stop sharing for 1 second while we just get set up once again. course, this never happens in practice, but
We were
on
perfect
the big stage.
every time. This went perfectly.
Okay. All right, we're almost there. Just hit this slide. So let's move to the next one. All right, so we're going to share the screen one more time. All right, hopefully we're back.
Yes, we see your slide.
Okay. Let's see if we can get the video to play without disrupting everything. Maybe I won't even risk it. Okay. All right. If this decides to play, which it doesn't seem like it's going to. Okay. All right. So getting back to the methods. So then in phase 3 of the study, we split the pairs of chickens into 2 groups, presented half the chickens with the learning opportunity. These chickens, okay. Hold on one second. Okay.
I've got it.
We don't need to play the video. We're okay. Okay. All right. Awesome. We have the video. Okay. So the chickens with access to the learning opportunity had to flip the lid off of a bowl in order to, in a new location in order to gain access to the reward. The other half of the group did not have access to a learning opportunity. So instead, they had to wait the same amount of time as their paired chicken took to perform the task before gaining access to the reward. And then finally, not pictured here, we gave chickens access to the gray bowl again in a subsequent judgment bias test to measure any changes in optimism or pessimism.
Okay, no more videos, so I think we're going to be okay. So we'll jump into the good stuff, the results. Does learning influence emotion in chickens? We are going to present preliminary findings here, but please stay tuned for more complete results in the future. All right, so let's start with looking at the latency to reach the gray bowl, or the number of seconds it took the chicken to reach the gray bowl in the baseline judgment bias test, where we are measuring baseline optimism or pessimism. On the y-axis here, you'll see the latency to reach that gray bowl. The x-axis is divided into the control group on the left, or those who did not have access to a learning opportunity after this baseline test, and the experimental group on the right, or those who did gain access to a learning opportunity. And at this point in the experiment, all chickens have had the same experiences, so no learning opportunities yet. Let's make note here that lower latencies indicate higher optimism because the chickens ran more quickly towards the ambiguous bowl, presumably believing that there would be food. And as we would expect, there's no significant difference in latencies between the control and experimental groups before the learning opportunity. But after the chickens in the experimental group have had access to a learning opportunity, you can see that the experimental group is significantly more optimistic than the control group. The question then is, did the experimental subjects become more optimistic after learning, or did the control group become more pessimistic, or maybe a little bit of both? So this graph still has latency to reward on the y-axis, but the x-axis is now showing the experimental group before learning on the left and after learning on the right. So our hypothesis here is that the experimental group will become more optimistic after learning, so latencies will go down in the second judgment bias test on the right. And here we see that despite it looking like they do become more optimistic after learning, that result is not statistically significant. So let's look now at the control group. They did not get to learn, and so our hypothesis is that their latencies should stay the same during the 2 judgment bias tests. Interestingly, here it appears that there is a non-significant trend towards becoming more pessimistic for the control group. So it looks like the significant difference we see between the control and experimental groups after learning may result from the control group becoming a bit more pessimistic and the experimental group becoming a bit more optimistic.
I know we had a bit of a technical difficulty. How much time do we have any time left?
You have about 1 minute and 15 seconds, and this is
Okay.
going into your Q&A.
Conclusion. Okay, so we are going to skip through these really cool individual differences, but we'd be happy to talk about that in the breakout room afterwards. But yeah, this just shows you there was individual differences in the emotional experience of learning. And then this is a cute video of Yoshi showing us that she wants to solve the task in a different way. Yeah, that's not what we were hoping for, but everyone's an individual. So we'll just go to our discussion quickly.
Okay, so overall, our results suggest that chickens who had access to learning were more optimistic after learning than those who didn't get to learn, one of whom became more pessimistic after not having access to learning. It appears that learning, or possibly the level of perceived agency, influences emotion, but the directionality of that influence may be individual in nature. Some chickens become more optimistic after learning, and some become more pessimistic. Stay tuned as we add personality assessments and analyze different components of our data. And finally, what should we do with this information? First of all, we want this work to help chickens. These preliminary results confirm that chickens are individuals with individual needs and preferences. They desire agency, and at least some chickens would like access to cognitive experiences like learning that are virtually impossible to provide to a barn full of 30,000 chickens. We'd like to see this knowledge incorporated into care practices for chickens, especially in sanctuaries where it is fully possible to elevate individual welfare and provide a stimulating cognitive environment. And as we learn more about the inner lives of chickens, we also hope this information will be incorporated into vegan advocacy, corporate engagement, and legislative policy work in ways to improve the lives of chickens. Thank you all very much. Our email addresses are there, so feel free to email us if you have any questions, and we will stick around during the Q&A session as well.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. So we just have one left for this first session. And again, once that next speaker is done, we'll have that breakout room, and yeah, we'll resume on schedule. So the last speaker for today, for this session, is Melissa and Daisy from the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So they pre-recorded their talk for us, which we'll play now, which is on consumer intentions when purchasing animal products with welfare-related labels.
Hi, my name is Melissa Thibault, and I'm a senior manager on the research team at the ASPCA. I'm here with Daisy Freund, who's our Vice President of Farm Animal Welfare at the ASPCA. And we're here to share with you some research that we did in 2020 that was recently published in the Journal of Food Ethics. First, we just wanted to ground you in what our mission is here at the ASPCA for Farm Animal Welfare. Our mission is to end factory farming. Knowing that that will take time, in the interim, we will work to reduce the number of animals suffering on factory farms. A little bit of background about why we did the research that we did. We know from consumers that they are concerned about farm animal welfare and that that concern is growing. As a result, they're using labels on products that they're purchasing to ensure that they're buying in line with that concern. The issue is that some of those labels do indicate better welfare for animals, and many don't, and consumers don't know the difference. As a result, consumers may be purchasing and paying more for products that don't align with their values and unknowingly contributing to factory farming. So to determine the scale of this issue, we administered a survey to 1,000 American grocery shoppers to better understand the extent to which consumers are buying and paying more for food with common labels based on the assumption that it delivers welfare improvement. You can see on the right the list of labels that were included in the study, and our analysis focused on 3 main groups of questions that I have down here in gray for reference. In the past year, have you purchased this specific product type with the following claims on the label or close variations? Did you make that purchase because you thought it indicated better treatment of the animals? And did you knowingly pay more because you thought that label indicated better treatment of the animals? What we found was that over 3/4 of consumers may be impacted by this. 86% of shoppers reported purchasing at least one of the labels in the last year. Almost 90% of those who purchased reported doing so because they thought that the label indicated better treatment of animals. And almost 80% of those who purchased consciously paid more because of the same assumption. And while those numbers in aggregate are very high, we found similarly high numbers at the label, at the individual label level. And here are just a couple of examples, but you can see about 3/4 of those who purchased each of these labels did so because they thought it indicated better treatment of animals. And almost 70% of those who made those purchases knowingly paid more because of the same assumption. In these 4 examples, however, they don't deliver consistent or meaningful impact to the welfare of the animals. So in the case of free range is defined as having outdoor access. However, size, duration, and quality are not specified. So the impact is very variable. In the case of humane is not defined by the FSIS at all. So again, the impact varies all the way down to having no impact at all. In the case of pasture raised, that's defined as not being confined to a feedlot, but it's not defined beyond that. So again, that's inconsistent impact. And the cage-free on poultry products delivers no impact because these animals are not conventionally raised in cages. So as you can see, the issue really lies around the standards being set and enforcement being in place. And these examples of labels stand in contrast to meaningful welfare certifications. This is just one example. Animal welfare approved is just one example of a meaningful welfare certification. They set publicly available standards. They conduct on-farm audits to ensure adherence to standards, and they deliver relatively consistent impact on animal welfare, as opposed to these welfare claims that have weak or no standards, no third-party or on-farm audits for enforcement, and they deliver no to inconsistent impact on animal welfare. In fact, we found that almost 60% of respondents who purchased certified products also purchased unverified labels, falsely assuming that they also consistently delivered on improved animal welfare. So just a reminder of the key learnings. Demand is high. 86% of consumers reported purchasing at least one of these products in the past 12 months, and they're willing to pay more. Almost 80% of those who purchased knowingly paid more because they assumed that that label indicated better welfare. Consumers can't differentiate between labels that ensure better welfare and those that don't. In fact, almost 60% of those who purchased certified products also purchased non-certified labels because they thought it also indicated consistent, improved animal welfare. So in conclusion, these findings demonstrate that welfare-related claims don't sufficiently communicate the welfare benefits they deliver, and so they don't enable consumers to purchase products that align with their expectations. Now I'm going to hand it over to Daisy to share some suggested actions and uses of this data.
Thank you, Melissa. So obviously this study adds to a whole body of research that really underscores how influential food labels are in our work to end factory farming and promote a more humane food system. And there are a few key opportunities for action right now that we wanted to highlight. One is really to mount pressure on the USDA to address this problem. And after consulting with the ASPCA and a number of other advocacy groups, the USDA recently announced reforms to rein in the use of unregulated animal welfare related terms. In a report in June issued to promote agricultural competition and fair market, the USDA acknowledged this problem and noted that FSIS is undertaking a review of animal raising claims to determine whether more should be done to ensure that they support fair competition and prevent consumer confusion. So we look forward to working with the USDA in the coming months to create new labeling guidelines with strong verification requirements and ensure that animal welfare claims paint a more truthful picture for shoppers and support all of our efforts to provide farmed animals with better lives. And that is something that other groups can also do and weigh in on. Or as an individual, you can get involved and build momentum for this by using an online form that can be found simply by Googling USDA food complaint, where anyone who notes one of these misleadingly labeled products can actually report it to the USDA. Another key window of opportunity is open right now in that the USDA has moved to reinstate urgently needed animal welfare standards in the organic program. These were originally finalized in 2017 and then withdrawn by the Trump administration in 2018, but the new Organic Livestock and Poultry Standards, or OLPS, rule is a second chance to give the nearly 65 million animals raised on organic farms better protections against factory farm-like conditions. The current USDA organic regulations require that animals have continuous access to the outdoors, but access is not clearly defined, so we see varied interpretations of that, and it's particularly problematic in the poultry industries where chickens on organic farms have been shown to have as little as a concrete run outside of what is otherwise a CAFO. So this new rule has a lot of good pieces in it. It will clarify that porches do not qualify as outdoor access. It sets clear outdoor access requirements for all species. It sets numerical indoor and outdoor space requirements for poultry. It requires enrichments indoors for all animals and overarching pain control requirements. There's still plenty of room, though, to improve. Farrowing crates are allowed, tie stalls are still allowed. There's no limits on chicken breeds, meaning that the fastest growing breeds that have been shown to have major welfare issues are still dominating the organic program. So these are all things that would be beneficial to comment on while the window is open, and it is until October 11th. And anyone can submit comments at aspca.org/organic rule. And lastly, there's the important work of sharing educational resources. The ASPCA has been operating a consumer education program called Shop with Your Heart for 5 years now, which includes extensive label education and all kinds of resources for consumers who are trying to navigate and understand the difference between meaningful and meaningless labels. And we have found through polling the regular users of these resources that consciousness of and skepticism around labels aligns with both reduction of animal product consumption and shifting to higher welfare products. So there's a lot of benefit to simply raising consciousness about this. And if you'd like to hear more, on the next slide, we have a link to the research itself that was just published, or you can scan our QR code on the screen here. Thank you so much.